The crunch of gravel beneath my shoes was the only sound that morning as I stepped outside and stopped dead in my tracks. The mailbox that I had replaced only 2 weeks ago leaned sideways, twisted at the base, as if someone had deliberately rammed at the paint with scraped raw metal, bent the door dangling open. Like a broken jaw, a letter spilled across the dew-covered grass, soggy, and ruined. My chest tightened with disbelief and rage. This was not the first time I had woken to this sight, and I knew, deep in my gut, exactly who was behind it. I crouched down, gathering damp envelopes, each one tearing in my hands, as if mocking my effort. The sharp scent of gasoline hung faintly in the cool air, a reminder. Tires screeching down this quiet street. I could almost see the smug grin of the woman who lived 3 houses away. The neighbors called her many things, but in hushed whispers. She was simply Kerren, her voice carried across lawns like a rusty trumpet, complaining about kids on bikes, garbage cans not aligned to her standard grass growing. Half an inch too high, she wore entitlement like a badge and cruelty like perfume. The first time my mailbox had been destroyed, I thought an accident. I had just moved and eager to settle into a peaceful neighborhood. When I knocked on her door and asked if she had noticed anything, she smiled with chill that cut through me. She leaned against her doorway, framed by hanging ferns, and said with a laugh, "Maybe if you bought one that did not look like a scrap heap, people would avoid it." The way her eyes narrowed told me everything she wanted me to know. She did it. That night, I replaced the mailbox again, hammering nails with stubborn rhythm, determined to shake off her malice. But 2 days later, it happened again. And then again. Each time her SUV mysteriously bore new scratches across the bumper, yet she walked past my property, as though daring me to say something. The HOA was supposed to keep order. So I brought my case before them. I showed pictures, receipts, even asked neighbors to testify, but the committee was stacked with her friends, and when I spoke, they leaned back in their chairs, stifling yawns. One man cleared his throat and said perhaps the mailbox is placed too close to the curb. A woman added maybe obstructs her view as she pulls out of her driveway. I felt as though I had been shoved out into the cold. When I confronted her face to face, my voice shaking from fury, she laughed. Her dog yapped at my ankles while she leaned closer than necessary, whispering, "You are new here. You should know better than to challenge me." There was a moment I understood logic would never pierce her armor of arrogance. She was not careless. She was deliberate. Her tires crushed metal not by chance, but by choice. That evening I stood before the mangled mailbox again, the streetlights buzzing overhead. My fists curled until my nails dug into my palms. The humiliation weighed heavier than the ruined metal. I realized then that she was not only targeting my property, she was testing me. She was daring me to either bow or fight back. I took a deep breath. The night air sharp in my lungs. The neighborhood was quiet, curtains drawn, silhouettes flickering behind glass. But I felt every eye on me, as though the entire street waited for my decision. I straightened the leaning post just enough so it would not topple over. Then I whispered to myself, "She thinks this is over, but it has only begun." And with that thought, a flicker of resolve lit in my chest, stronger than the anger that had consumed me. For the first time since moving here, I knew exactly what I had to do. 2 mornings later, I carried a brand-new mailbox out to the curb, its polished frame glinting beneath the sun. I had chosen it carefully, sturdy enough to last, yet ordinary enough not to draw attention. As I planted it into ground, neighbors passed by with polite nods, but I could feel the weight of their silent judgment. Some avoided my gaze, as if siding against Kerren was too dangerous. Others lingered, their eyes curious, but cautious. I hammered the final nail with a force that echoed down the quiet street, and told myself this time it would stand. For a brief moment, hope settled in my chest. I imagined collecting my mail in peace, walking back up the driveway without dread, but that hope shattered that very afternoon when I returned from work. The new mailbox lay scattered in pieces across the lawn. The post snapped clean, the door bent inward like a crushed can, and there she was, Kerren, standing by her SUV, keys dangling from her fingers, a smug smile painted across her face. Neighbors gathered nearby, whispering behind cupped hands, while she raised her voice loud enough for all to hear. "Maybe if you could afford a decent one, it would not fall apart so easily." Her laughter stung sharper than the twisted metal at my feet. I wanted to shout, but my voice caught in my throat. The humiliation was complete. Her friends from the HOA nodded in agreement. One even chuckled, as though my misfortune was nothing more than a neighborhood amusement. A woman on the porch across the street shook her head, but quickly retreated indoors, unwilling to draw her wrath. The injustice pressed on me heavy and suffocating. That evening I dialed the HOA once more, demanding they address the destruction. The president answered with a clipped tone, and after a long pause, He sighed, "Your mailbox might not meet the required visibility standards if it obstructs a vehicle exiting the driveway of the homeowner. Cannot be held at fault." My grip on the phone tightened. I asked if repeated incidents did not suggest intent. He cleared his throat and muttered, "We cannot assume. Malice without evidence. It is best you replace it again and be mindful of the placement." His words were not advice, they were dismissal. I slammed the phone down the walls of my home, closing in on me. The rage boiled hotter than before. Because now it was not only Kerren, it was the entire system bending around her ego. She was untouchable, shielded by friends' influence and intimidation. Every logical path had been blocked, and I was left stranded in humiliation. My property damaged, my pride trampled, my voice silenced. That night, I walked to the edge of the street. The remains of the mailbox still scattered across the grass. The moonlight cast long shadows, and the cool breeze carried the faint scent of gasoline. I stared at the broken post and realized repairing again would change nothing. Kerren would return, her SUV would strike, and the cycle would continue. She thrived on destruction, and she fed on the silence of those too afraid to oppose her. I closed my eyes, my heart pounding with a rhythm that demanded action. This was no longer about a mailbox. This was about respect, dignity, and the right to stand unbroken in a place I called home. The humiliation had carved its mark deep, but it had also sharpened something within me. I knew then that confrontation would fail. Kerren thrived on spectacle. She relished in mocking retaliation. If I challenged her openly, she would twist it against me, just as she always did. So I chose another path. The quiet, dangerous certainty settled over me. Logic would not stop her, but strategy might for the first time since moving here. I let go of the notion that fairness would prevail. I did not want fairness anymore. I wanted justice. And if she wanted war, she would soon discover that I could fight a battle she could never anticipate. As I turned back toward the house, the broken pieces of the mailbox crunching beneath my feet, I felt strangely calm. My rage had cooled into something sharper, more deliberate. I whispered under my breath, "She has no idea what is coming." And in that moment, I was no longer her victim. I was her opponent. The following week, I buried myself in research. Every evening, my laptop glowing in the dim light of my living room, I studied county regulations on roadside fixtures, digging through clauses and bylaws until my eyes ached. Most of it was dry language about setbacks and clear zones. But buried among the text, I found what I needed. A homeowner could install a reinforced security mailbox as long as it was anchored properly and approved by the HOA. For aesthetics, the law did not forbid strength. It only required that appearances remain within guidelines. That loophole was my weapon. I spent days sketching ideas, measuring the curb, and scouring hardware stores until I discovered the perfect design. A steel post encased in decorative wood, the kind that looked ordinary but could withstand a blow strong enough to cripple a vehicle. When I touched the cold metal, I felt the thrill of certainty ripple through me. This was not just a replacement, this was a trap. Still, I knew Kerren would look for any excuse to accuse me. So I played carefully. I submitted a request to the HOA, complete with diagrams and a picture of the wooden exterior. They approved it without hesitation, too busy to notice the iron skeleton hidden within a letter of approval arrived, stamped, and signed. A shield that I tucked away like a secret weapon. Now, no matter what happened, I was protected. On a Saturday morning, I set to work planting the new post into the soil, digging deep until the base sank like a pillar into the earth. Sweat poured down my face as the sun climbed overhead, but each strike of the shovel carried a sense of satisfaction. Neighbors strolled past, pretending not to watch, but I caught their furtive glances. They sensed something different in my determination. Kerren herself slowed her SUV as she passed, rolling down her window. "To smirk, enjoying your little project," I smiled, back with a calmness that unnerved even me. "You will see soon enough," I thought. By evening, the mailbox stood tall, perfectly aligned, gleaming under the fading light. It looked unremarkable, even delicate, with its polished wooden casing and neat paint. But beneath its surface, it was immovable, indestructible, waiting with quiet patience for the inevitable. I stepped back, admiring the work, and for the first time in weeks, I felt anticipation instead of dread. The days that followed were tense like the hush before a storm. Every time I heard the rumble of her SUV, my pulse quickened. I imagined the moment her bumper would collide with a hidden steel. Imagine the screech of metal, the shock on her face as her arrogance shattered. I waited not with fear, but with certainty, because her pattern was predictable. She could not resist. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of crimson, I stood inside by the window lights, off watching her SUV crawl past my house. Once, then twice, the third time, she accelerated her headlights, glaring like eyes narrowed and challenged. My breath caught in my throat as I whispered to myself, "Do it, Kerren." She swerved slightly, wheels crunching over gravel, then with deliberate force, she slammed into mailbox. The impact was thunderous, a crack like a gunshot echoing through the street. Metal shrieked, rubber burned, and in an instant her vehicle shuddered to a violent halt. The reinforced post did not budge, not even an inch. Her SUV crumpled against the hood, folding like paper. The airbag exploded with a muffled thud. The sound carried across the neighborhood, drawing curtains open and doors swinging wide. I stepped outside, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. Neighbors emerged from every direction, some covering their mouths in shock, others barely suppressing laughter. The scene was almost surreal. Kerren, trapped behind the wheel, dazed, hair disheveled, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping. She pounded the steering wheel, screaming incoherently, while the mailbox stood pristine, tall, and unbroken beside the wreck. I stood at the edge of my driveway, the approval letter tucked safely in my pocket. The satisfaction that coursed through me was not wild or vengeful. It was cold, sharp justice. She had finally collided not with my property, but with her own arrogance, and the sound of it echoed to the night like a promise of what was still to come. The wail of sirens grew louder until red and blue lights spilled across the street, painting every house in the neighborhood in pulsing color. Kerren was still shouting behind the cracked windshield, her voice hoarse with fury. She stumbled from the driver's side, clutching her arm and pointing at the mailbox, screaming, "He did this! He set a trap! It is his fault!" Her accusations flew into the night, but no one rushed to her defense. Not this time. The neighbors stood in small clusters, some whispering, some filming with their phones, their eyes shining with the hunger of an audience, finally watching the tyrant stumble. The officers approached, calm and deliberate. One examined the wreck, her SUV crumpled beyond recognition, while another inspected the mailbox, still upright with barely a scratch. When Kerren lunged toward me, spewing venomous insults, they stepped between us, asking her to stay back. I handed them the folded papers from my pocket. The HOA approval stamped clear. The officer scanned the document, then looked at me with a small nod. His words carried weight enough to silence the crowd. "Everything here is legal. The mailbox was approved by the association. It meets all safety codes. The collision was the result of reckless driving." Kerren froze, the words striking her harder than the airbag. Her face twisted from red to pale, then to something brittle like glass about to shatter. She stammered, "No. He set me up. He wanted this." But the officer shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, you destroyed private property on multiple occasions. Witnesses confirm a pattern of behavior. This time, you damaged your own vehicle. The responsibility is yours." The murmur of the crowd grew louder, laughter slipping through the cracks. Neighbors who once kept their curtains drawn now stepped forward, emboldened. One man said, "I have seen her hit his mailbox before." Another added, "She brags about it at meetings." The weight of testimony pressed down on her until her protest crumbled into incoherent shrieks. She looked around for allies, but found only smirks and recording phones capturing every moment. When the tow truck arrived, the sight was almost theatrical. The mailbox stood tall, its paint gleaming under the streetlight. While her mangled SUV was dragged away, sparks flicking from the asphalt, she collapsed on the curb, sobbing. But the sympathy she sought never came. Instead, whispers turned to chuckles, and chuckles to outright laughter. A teenage boy shouted, "Looks like the mailbox won." Everyone laughed, and the phrase caught fire, passing from mouth to mouth, until the whole street was buzzing with it. The HOA board arrived later, their faces pinched with embarrassment, forced to acknowledge what had been obvious all along. The president cleared his throat, fumbling with his tie, and mumbled, "We may have been misled. Our association does not condone such behavior." He offered me a strained apology, but I could see the shift in power. The untouchable queen of the neighborhood had been dethroned. Kerren was issued citations, and fines or insurance threatened to drop her, and whispers spread that legal action might follow. Yet the true punishment was not in paperwork. It was in the humiliation of videos of her screaming at the mailbox while her SUV smoldered, traveled faster than wildfire. Neighbors uploaded clips to social media, and within days the footage went viral. Headlines, mocker arrogance memes sprouted everywhere. One showed her SUV crumpled beside the indestructible mailbox with the caption, "Respect the post." Another stitched her tantrum with a slow-motion replay of the crash, followed by laughter tracks. I walked through the neighborhood in the following days, no longer the quiet newcomer, but the man who had stood his ground. People nodded with respect. Some clapped me on the back, and one elderly neighbor whispered, "Good for you." She needed to be stopped. My mailbox gleamed in the sun, not just a piece of steel, and with but a symbol, a line drawn that could not be crossed. As for Kerren, she avoided me, now her eyes darting away. Whenever our paths crossed, her SUV remained in a repair shop, and her once commanding voice had withered into bitter mutters. She no longer barked orders at children or scolded neighbors about their lawns. She became small, diminished, stripped of the power she wielded so carelessly. One evening, as I collected the mail, I paused, fingers brushing the cold steel to post a memory of her arrogance. The countless mornings of destruction and humiliation all seemed distant now, replaced by the echo of her downfall. I glanced toward her house, curtains drawn, lights dimmed. Then, with a faint smile, I whispered to myself, "Looks like the mailbox won." And with that the chapter closed, the war she started ended not with fists or shouting, but with her own pride colliding against an unmovable wall. The neighborhood was quiet at last, and I walked back toward my home each step lighter than the last, knowing justice had finally been served.